What's up, gamers? Welcome to episode 17 of the Business Casual Gamers podcast. I'm Aaron Connick, back here with you again, my trusty co-host, Chris Smoke. Chris, how we doing?
Doing very well, Aaron.
Hey, we've been together 17 episodes. That is trustworthy if I've ever seen it. So we're really happy you're joining us again. We got a great show planned for you. Before we jump into it, I want to give you all of the media links to connect with us because we've got plenty of them. Easiest way to find us, as always, is our website, www.businesscasualgamers.com. It'll have links to the podcast. It'll have links to our YouTube channel. It'll have links to our Twitter feed. Everything's going to be there. So as always, you can find a lot of fun and friendly banter back on Twitter.
Oh, yes.
I trolled Chris for my previous week's gaming assignment last week that he was so desiring to revisit quickly after he hated on it last week. We also on YouTube, we've had plenty of great content coming out. The one I'd like to highlight, if you have not watched the retro rerun of NBA Jam, I've rewatched that. I had a lot of fun. I had a lot of laughs both creating it and just to whet the appetite. If you need a little bit of a fun break from this season's presidential election, there is no way you can better settle a score than I think watching our YouTube video. Would you agree with that,
It is a battle for the ages,
Excellent.
Sir. A battle for the ages.
And as always, if you've been with us for any length of time, if you like what you're hearing and you want to support the podcast, the best way you can do that is to take the time, give us a quick rating on iTunes or whatever service you listen to us on. It would mean a lot to us and certainly help get the message out to other interested gamers who would love to discover the podcast and join in on the conversation. So with that, Chris, let us get into this week's BCG discussion topic of the week. And I want to kind of set this up as almost a public service announcement of sorts. Certainly after doing the podcast for long enough and kind of socializing with other people that we know that we are doing a game-focused podcast, you kind of have the natural inclination of people to start asking you. You're identified as the video game guy, right?
Yeah, right.
And so you naturally get a bunch of questions, both about people who are really hardcore into the hobby, wanting recommendations, or people who have enjoyed games at one point in their lives, but have kind of gotten away from the hobby, and the conversation with you is almost an invitation to kind of hook them back in.
Exactly, right.
So what we wanted to talk about this week, because we know many of you in the audience are probably that same person in your own lives, whether it's a family member or a spouse or a coworker, I would be willing to bet that many of you get these same questions as well. And we wanted to kind of make this an interactive discussion with the community to talk about how do we best serve both the current gaming community, but also what I'd call the future gaming generations, the people who are the future gamers, but they just don't know it yet, or they just need that first experience to get them into the hobby. So Chris, why don't you talk through kind of a little bit about why would somebody want to get back in games? Why would somebody even approach you about something like this in the first place?
Yeah, and I think this certainly speaks to the overall, I guess, the where we've come so far. We've definitely come very far in the past 15, 25 years, I guess, in gaming. And so we've highlighted just a handful of things that we think are interesting when it comes to why you get back into gaming. Number one, I think this probably stands out to me as the most important aspect, perhaps. Well, it's my personal perspective, but I think the ability to overall tell a story has gotten much, much, much better over the years. And this is, we argued back and forth in previous episodes about, do graphics really make a game or so on.
Sure.
But I think there certainly is something. You can, when we think about a lot of popular media where you go watch like Netflix shows or you watch movies or anything like that, a lot of those kinds of interactions, we really want the drama, we really want the story.
Yeah.
And when you think about the latest two generations of consoles, we've certainly reached a point with games like The Last of Us or Uncharted, or I mentioned Gone Home a couple episodes ago. These are games where you can almost kind of lose yourself in the thing and forget that it is an interactive experience that is almost I would say even better than a movie. And it's kind of like those interactive storybooks. If any of you are old enough to see remember those choose your own adventure books back in the day, right? I mean, now those books were great, and the idea there was, you get to a point in the end of this book, and it says, do you go left or right in this trail? Turn to page 2 for left, and if you go right, turn to page 100. And that was an interesting way to get that interactivity in there. Now you get to the point where video games allow us to do that and be able to tell a story that, leaves you so emotionally wrecked at the end of them. We've talked about them, that it's fun.
And this is something for me that I think has really grown over the years, and honestly, probably more than anything else, has kept me into the hobby. I think that if you look at a lot of different areas of things that I used to be much more involved in or used to enjoy, would watch more TV, more movies, more sports. Mm-hmm. But I find nowadays I look at those, and even though there's nothing wrong with those, I still enjoy all of those to some extent. A lot of times I find when I sit down and I watch a lot of movies or you watch sports, something like that, I kind of stand up at the end and walk away saying, I think I had fun, but I didn't really do anything. And I just kind of feel this sense of emptiness, like I got to watch somebody else achieve this victory or play this really cool role or be a part of this really cool world. Mm-hmm. But I felt like I was watching it rather than participating in it. And it just kind of puts this wall between you and all the stuff that you're watching. And to me, video games, especially nowadays, to your point, where it kind of breaks that wall where you're not trying to pretend you're taking some pixelated character on the screen and trying to kind of superimpose yourself on that character. Right. You're taking stuff that looks very realistic, and it's very easy to kind of mentally escape into that experience. Mm-hmm. And I really look when I talk about it with a lot of people I know who read fiction books, and I tell them there's nothing wrong with reading fiction. But to me, I just get so much more out of playing great video game stories because nothing keeps me coming back to when you get this emotional connection with a game. I just really feel like it always brings me back. And I agree. When I tell people or I find people who are really attracted to those mediums, I always tell them, like, have you played this game? Have you Shadow of the Colossus is one for me. I say,
of course.
If you want, it's not a long game, but if you want something that has this amazing subtle story where you can kind of fill in the blanks, you'll love this game. And I do think that there is an avenue for a lot of people to enjoy that.
Yeah, it's funny you mention, kind of the kind of stupefaction or the zombification of people that watch TV. And I don't say that in a negative sense, but I think I feel the same way. You sit down, you get up after watching a marathon on Netflix or whatever, and we all do those kinds of things. But you realize, wow, I just sat here for 4 hours, and I didn't really, I went on a little bit of a ride, but it wasn't as compelling as I could sit down and play Last of Us for 4 hours and not even realize it. But it's funny because, consider this as a quick aside here. Consider how that differs with Twitch, because, we talked about Twitch a little bit in the same notion. You are watching someone play a game, although I would still argue that you feel just as connected. It's not like you're, watching someone play a video game is very different, fortunately, it's markedly different from watching a movie, in some ways as well. So I think there are certainly some areas where video games will help bring home that kind of interactivity, and overall the ability to tell that story has certainly been bolstered over the last 5 or 10 years. So the next thing we want to talk about here is another reason why people would come to us and get back into games. And many of these, I should mention, are, as Aaron mentioned, things that people have mentioned to us in over the last couple weeks and months as we've done the podcast, that have really rekindled and kind of drove the need for us, or the feeling for us to have this topic. Is, I think that, back in the day, when we were playing games, and we talked about this before, when many of us were young, back in the in the earlier days, 10, 15 years ago or so, maybe even more in many cases, we had, the bond that we had with friends was really, hey, can you come over and play video games with me in the same room? And we talked about that, how your world, in the Blockbuster world, your world was very, very small, and it could be a 2 or 5, 10 mile radius, whatever it is. As we've gotten, into the last, I guess, probably the last 2 generations with the Xbox 360, Microsoft did a really good job, I think, with Xbox Live, and certainly PC helped push the way along as well with other MMOs and other things like that. But the ability to bond with people over multiplayer has been absolutely great. Now, I'll give you an example, an anecdote from some friends I have at work. Actually, he's a father of a 7-year-old, and he actually mentioned that, his 7-year-old's best friend had moved away. They moved to Texas a couple months ago. And The cool part about this is, given the way the connectivity that we have, whether it's using FaceTime or getting on PS4, PS3 and playing a game with people, or playing on the PC, for example, the ability to connect with people, other people with like minds or friends who've moved along, has been so exceptional over the past couple of years. This is why, we might want to do this with games. Because remember, back in the day, when a friend moved away, well, you kind of just, shake hands, hug them or whatever and say bye, and you may not see them for 20 years.
Right, exactly. And I think this is another one where I look at it, at my own experience, and both of us, when you were growing up, how many people did you bond over a game of GoldenEye, Mario Kart, whatever? Yeah, pick the generation, exactly. But I cannot count on both hands the number of times that I was at somebody's house. Maybe you knew a couple people, but there'd inevitably be a few friends of a friend, if you will, that you didn't know. But the minute you got into the game, it just kind of broke down all the barriers. And at that point, it was somebody that was on your team and you had to cooperate with. And you found yourself at the end of an hour of gaming, suddenly just you felt like you've been best friends forever.
Friends, right, exactly.
And games, I think I've mentioned it on a past podcast, but Chris and I met back in the 6th grade when we were in a class talking about video games. We kind of overheard each other and with a group of friends. And it's just something that to us, that has been the foundation of our friendship for so many years. And you look at it as something where somebody that is a complete stranger that maybe you ordinarily, you pass each other in the hallway every day and you don't know the person's name, but then you find out that they have that video game commonality, that interest, that same favorite game, and it just immediately kind of latches you onto that person. And I still think that as much as, to your point, you have the ability to play at a much greater distance than before. You don't have to have couch co-op or no co-op. You certainly have a lot of variety that's available now that just wasn't available when we started. But I think that there certainly is still that same ability to bring people together. And when you're laughing, you're having a good time, even if you're in a stressful situation where you're trying to do something challenging together. I still feel like it has that bonding experience. Another example that I'll talk about is, we both obviously have lots of coworkers, and when I look at the inevitable bonding activities or team outings that happen over work to try and get people who are normally sitting next to each other at a cubicle, and you're trying to kind of force them to have fun together and to get to know each other and to socialize. We just do
trust falls.
Yeah, just blind trust fall, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. I mean, it makes perfect sense. I don't know what could go wrong. But you look at those situations, and in my mind, I think the most successful outings have always been the ones where it's not just people kind of going to a cool place, or you go to a nice restaurant, or you go to a happy hour. That's all fine. Maybe something materializes out of that. But I've always found when you're getting people to do an activity together, maybe some people have done before, maybe some people haven't, but when you get an activity going, I always feel like no matter what walk of life, no matter what age, no matter what background, it just has this unifying quality to video games that I've seen it so many times where people just put down their guard and have a good time. And it has always been for me a way to get to know people, to have a few laughs, to kind of do something silly together at times. And I do feel like that is still a really strong pull that video games have that I don't know that there are a lot of other mediums, certainly from a, kind of, I'll call it, when you look at movies, TV, things like that, you can't experience it in the same way. You can't, having a conversation about your favorite show, in my mind, still does not measure up to sitting down together and playing a game. No,
I agree. And it's funny, we touched on this, I think, actually, the Gamer You Didn't Expect episode, it feels like years ago, many months ago. And it's funny how, I don't know if I told the story before in the podcast, but I'm a nerd. I wear a whole bunch of t-shirts. Like right now I'm wearing an SGDQ shirt from a month ago. And I try my best when I don't need to dress up for work or other types of things. I try to wear these kinds of t-shirts. And it's funny, I went to the grocery store one time last year, and I wore it was a speedrunning t-shirt that had Final Fantasy characters on it, among other things. And as I was walking back to my car, one of the workers there stopped me and pointed out and said, Final Fantasy, you like Final Fantasy? And I said, well, yeah. And was like, do you like speedrunning? This is actually a speedrunning t-shirt. And so we started talking about what speedrunning was, and it was a really cool interaction.
Yeah.
And I think those are the kinds of things that those icebreaker moments we're talking about now that games help. And truthfully, I'll to be honest, these are kinds of things that any kind of there are many kinds of things that help with. If you have tattoos and people look at you and say, "Oh, tell me about your tattoos," those can be icebreakers as well. But in this case, the video game angle is certainly something that, to Aaron's point, right? It's much more, I guess, compelling. Much more of a deep experience, and kind of a more visceral, I guess, is a good way to describe it, experience than just, you never bring people over you've never met before and say, oh, sit down and, watch Netflix and chill.
Sure.
Maybe some people do that, but not often, right?
One of the last ones I'll introduce, I think that maybe a little bit unique, but I think this is another way to both identify and maybe appeal to potential gamers. To me, the medium has kind of moved to a point where I think in the earliest forms of video games, at least for me, and Chris, I think you probably would agree, I think a lot of the early games were defined by mechanics. Do I enjoy this? Is the jumping tight, or is the level design good?
They kind of had to rely on that.
Yeah, is the performance good? There's a lot of that of you can't really kind of, I'll say, you can't put much else out there other than the gameplay experience. Like you said, story wasn't a big thing. But
hang on a minute. Are you telling me that Bad Dudes didn't have a good story?
Saving Ronnie, I mean, with Stryker, and you got the tanks.
That would have been, if we were to make a movie of Bad Dudes, and I'm totally advocating for doing this, it would be.
I mean, that's basically the plot of 24, right? I mean, it's like
you're kind of right.
Yeah, right. Except not as cool of characters.
Yeah, I'll give you that.
50% less tank tops, possibly.
Oh my gosh.
But as artistic a medium as Bad Dudes was, and certainly the pixelated "I'm bad" at the end of each level,
the garbled "I'm bad,"
exactly. As great as that was, one of the things that video games has become for me, and I think that while you may not agree with maybe my game choice, as much controversy is going around with the upcoming Final Fantasy, one of the things that I will always credit Final Fantasy for is that I will always come back to the genre or the franchise, because I always feel like Square invests so much in the art direction and in the music for those games.
Oh, yeah.
And it really is something that when I sit down and look at it, there were certainly faults that I found with every Final Fantasy game, but I think the thing that I walk away with from all of those games, I really love the music. The musical style is not something, when I look at music purchases that I make or things that I consume on YouTube, it tends not to be more classical music, for lack of a better term, or orchestral music. And Final Fantasy and similar games, many of the video games I play, it's kind of my opportunity to really immerse myself in that. I'm not somebody that is much into art. I'm not. You are a much more artistically gifted person than I am in terms of creating it and probably
not so
being
gifted,
able to
but
appreciate it. There you go. I enjoy it, but I am not able to create it. And so I always look at those games, Final Fantasy and others, and I really love the art in the games. I love kind of the feelings it evokes to see these worlds that are created. And I just really enjoy where games are now, where you can just kind of go lose yourself in this place really, even whether it's beautiful, whether it's terrifying, whatever it is that you're trying to kind of escape and immerse yourself in. I feel like the worlds that are available now in video games, they just offer so much that's something where the medium has really taken on a new meaning to me that it probably didn't have 10 years ago. What do you think about this?
Yeah, and they were even, honestly, they were even doing this. Squaresoft in particular was doing this even in the SNES days. As you're saying this, I get this vivid memory, image in my head of Terra, marching in the Magitech armor towards Narshe in the very beginning in Final Fantasy 6 or 3, and I think that. You're right. I mean, the worlds certainly have gotten. Just go play Uncharted 4 if you want to, just to see how absolutely amazing these kinds of worlds can be. But to me, you're right. One of the things that I loved, even back into the retro days, that the Final Fantasy VI music, the score in my mind is the best of any video game ever. Period. It is beyond anything I've ever seen. I love that music, and I love seeing how games are starting to get better in their kind of immersiveness in this case. And we talked about it before, Star Wars Battlefront. I was playing that again a little while ago, a couple weeks ago actually, and one of the coolest parts about it was, and I said it back then and I'll say it now, is that the sound design in that game is so exceptional. You could literally, first of all, the graphics are amazing as well, so you don't have to close your eyes, but close your eyes and you are on Endor, and you are in the middle of a battle, or you are on Tatooine, or whatever it might be, and you're in the middle of all these battles. The lasers, the gunshots, the lasers are all over the place. You can hear the lightsabers, you can hear all the players involved, and that, you're right. That, I think, and some people will argue, and rightfully so, that movies can do very similar things with immersiveness and sound, but I just feel like when you are able to control that image, right? You're we use the phrase art in motion, right? When you are controlling the way that goes, you're controlling how the sounds appear, or I guess come and to and fro in your ears, and forward and back, and all those kinds of things. That really helps kind of sell the overall immersiveness in the end. And for me, it is the core component to what makes it so interesting.
And Chris, I certainly think your gaming assignment from last week, Child of Eden, I'm sure you would agree that is a true work of art, right?
No comment.
No
comment.
Okay.
It is a work of art. Okay, here's how it's a work of art, ladies and gentlemen. This is how you make Child of Eden a work of art. You take the disc out, you break it into pieces, you put it in a barrel, and you catch it on fire. That will be a work of art. I'll take pictures. I'll put it on. Actually, no. I had to give the game back.
That is like new wave art. If I've ever. That is very angry. What is it? Rage art.
I'll call it like Child of Eden Reborn. The phoenix hath risen from the flames of the barrel and the destroyed CD.
Nice. Listen to that if you haven't. Certainly a phenomenal opinion.
Am I too harsh? I don't know.
No, but it was a good time. But so we've talked about some reasons why people might be looking to either get into the hobby for the first time, or some angles of the hobby if they've been away from it for a while that might get them back. Let's talk about some, I would say, common situations that we find ourselves in. And let me run through the list really quickly, and then we'll go back and we'll dive into each one of these in a little more detail. So the three primary categories or conversations that I'm approached with are, one, former gamers who were really dialed into a certain generation, a certain console, a certain game, and they want to go back and play the games that they remember from their childhood, from college, whatever it was. Second category of gamers are either brand new gamers or former gamers that have been away, that they see the new hot game and they just say, I want to play that. I don't know what system it's on. VR. I don't know. Yeah. VR could be a very good example. And that's kind of your second category. The third one is, I would say, either brand new gamers or former gamers that maybe skipped a console generation, or they've been away.
They fell out of the scene for a while.
And they're not necessarily attracted to a single game. They're not even necessarily looking for the latest release, but they've been away from the hobby for a while, and maybe they come back in and they say, you know what? I want to catch up on lost times. There's been, I have friends that play games. They tell me about all these cool games that I missed. I just kind of want to get back in and I want to play the classics.
Right.
And I would say those are kind of the three primary categories of gamers or interested people that I hear from. Certainly others, but why don't we kind of focus in on these three? And I want to talk about, how do we approach those conversations? How do you really help advise these potential gamers? Because I look at this as kind of a responsibility on us and our audience. If we are really the standard bearers for the hobby, and we've kind of been with the hobby for a while, maybe we're a little bit more mature. We've got some experience. We've got some ability to go back a little further and recommend a lot. We have a wider range within our gaming history. I think it is something that we should take as a responsibility almost to be prepared and equipped to have these conversations.
No, I agree. And so let's talk about that. We've got a former gamer who played maybe in the 8-bit, 16-bit era, for example. They had friends when they were growing up that had Super Nintendo, for example. Now they want to get back into that.
Yeah.
So. And this is actually, there are actually multiple reasons for this. Actually, it kind of bleeds over into the new gamers component as well. But I've had plenty of people that are, our age that have come to us and said, hey, I used to love video games. I want to get into video games, but I also have kids, and now I'd like to get my 7, 8, or 10-year-old now to play games with me. But they're not going to play this new stuff yet. Instead, I want them to play I want to play Silver Surfer for the NES, so they know back in my day, you know, shake my stick and get off my lawn. These games were actually hard, and so I think there are a couple of things you could do there. Number one, I think that honestly, I think the most applicable, in my personal opinion, the most applicable system for that from that era would probably be Super Nintendo.
Yeah, that is the one, honestly, I get the most frequently cited as, this is something I loved this game. I want to go back and play this, but I don't have my console. I don't have that game anymore.
I mean, it's number one, it's got a ludicrous amount of games for it and a really wide range of games. So, you know, where we think we talked, you know, last episode in the Sega retrospective about how Genesis was very edgy, and very much it was very edgy. And so I think that it's not as universally applicable to a generic set of gamers. And so if you're buying this for a friend, recommending it for a friend or a family, you can get the most bang for the buck on the SNES. And there are very few games in my mind that were number one, that were never made it to the Super Nintendo, but did make it to the Genesis exclusively. But even more so, I think that there are very few games that were ported to multiple systems that weren't better on the Super Nintendo.
Right.
In fact, I'm going to talk about one of the edge cases there, the difference cases where I think the game is better on the Genesis at the end of the show. But I think that's what you want to go for, right? It's got the RPGs. It's got a lot of the platformers. This is when we're really starting to understand back in that era what kind of game genres what we were gonna do when we grew up as far as a gaming industry. So there are a lot of opportunities there for picking.
And if I look at the goal here in these conversations, a lot of times, right, when they're coming to you saying, I want to play this game or I want this console generation, you're not having to sell them or convince them of a particular game. They know what they want.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Really what you're trying to do is help them get the game that they want or the console that they want at the most affordable price, kind of in the easiest method of delivery.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, and I don't know if you find this, Chris, I think there's kind of an appreciation from people who are a bit outside the hobby that you certainly see the occasional news story of some game that sells for some ludicrous amount of money. But a lot of times when people come back and maybe they expect to just go eBay it up and kind of get caught up with a particular generation, I often find that depending on, well, even honestly, almost regardless of the console at this point, but if you go back to Super Nintendo era and earlier, a lot of times there's a bit of a sticker shock when they see the price, especially if they've got good taste and they want some good games. You take like an Earthbound, for instance. You know, you see a mint in box Earthbound, and you're like, "Whoa, wait a minute!
$200,
I like
easy.
it. I don't. How much do I like it?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that is a frustration point. So realistically, what do you say? So you've got some people who are, I think, in my personal opinion, granted, I am a retro game collector in many respects. You know, I think that part of the draw here, especially if you're trying to remember games of childhood, is actually having that full experience of taking the cartridge, slamming it into the system, turning on that power button. So I think that, you know, while it's easy for us to say there are a lot of virtual console, areas or ways to get some of these games, and truthfully, for games like Earthbound, that might be the best way. There are obviously some emulation components you can do, and you can go back and forth as to whether or not you think that's appropriate. But then, you know, I think the Super Nintendo, interestingly, you're planning on you're going to spend $50 to $75 for a good Super Nintendo. But the key here, and granted that is expensive, but it's a system that's 30 plus years old. I haven't, it came out 91 or something like that. So it's been around for a long time. And although, I have 2 or 3 Super Nintendos in various forms now, they all work like champs. So you don't necessarily have to have the issue with Nintendo and NES in the very beginning, of course, is the lockout chip and then the 72 pin connectors and those kinds of things. You don't want to recommend anything for anyone that's going to make them frustrated, right? You want to be able to buy a system, invest, and I think it's investing. So you invest, $75 in a relatively decent Super Nintendo or Super Famicom, and you can pick up a lot of games outside of the big SquareSoft games, outside of the Earthbound Mother games. There's a handful of other small games like Metal Storm that are really, really good game, really fun to play, that'll just be a little bit difficult. But the point here is you still have really, really fun set of other games you can play that are very representative of game. Like you can go buy Mario World or anything like that, super, super cheap.
And I think this is where Nintendo has kind of stepped in. And certainly they're not the first one to really approach how do we deliver retro games, right? There are plenty of companies, all of the major publishers I think, understand that there is demand for their great retro games.
Definitely.
But I think that the news that we were talking about on a past episode, where Nintendo is getting to release the new, I'll call it console, where they basically give you something that kind of looks like an NES, a little bit smaller, and they just jam a bunch of games with the expectation that we put some good stuff on here. You're probably going to like at least one of these.
Exactly.
And frankly, if we can get $60 out of you, whatever it is, that would be money that would otherwise be spent on eBay, or maybe somebody would, the barrier to entry for logging onto Virtual Console or going through something like that. Maybe these are people that just, they didn't want to overcome that barrier of entry enough to make a purchase. But if we can just sell them a box at a store and they see it on the way home and they're walking by it in the store and they say, you know what, I will pay $60 to try this out.
Right.
I think they realize that there are enough people in this category that have some connection to the hobby that this is going to be, I think, an interesting test case, because I look at that and I say, because exactly the same as Chris, I look at myself as a collector of great retro games. And I certainly, I am very cognizant of making sure that the way I collect those, kind of the method of delivery, I just want the best experience. I don't want to clutter up my room necessarily. There's stuff that I want to own in physical copy, but more often than not, I just want easy access to it, and I don't want to have 8,000 boxes plugged in. So, but I do recognize that I think I'm in the minority there, and so how they need to sell to me is probably quite a bit different from how companies need to really reach out to the mainstream retro gamers, I'll call it.
Yeah, and I think I would say that if you already have number one, you have to have a pre-existing console to get these VC games, like these virtual console games. And, I think that is certainly a barrier to entry. If you already have that, chances are you might not be in this position. But I think Virtual Console is certainly, you downplay it, but I think that Virtual Console is a very good way and a very cheap, effective way to get games you would normally not be able to get. And, you wouldn't have to worry about issues with different, with TVs and whatnot. People will always tell you that a Super Nintendo needs to be connected to, an old CRT screen.
Right.
By the way, that's not true.
It's not.
You can very, very easily. I actually run my Super Nintendos through the multi-out on Super Nintendos. Actually can produce. You can get a multi-out to a SCART connector, which is actually a European standard. Plug it into a $20 HDMI converter and run it on a 1080p monitor upscaled, and it actually looks pretty darn good in my mind. So, I think the question, the thing there, if you're looking at retro games, Super Nintendo is a great way to do it. If you really prefer to go more hardware, I suggest buying a Super Nintendo, and you're going to invest maybe $150, $200 in a handful of games, a system, and a way to put it on your 55-inch whatever TV that looks pretty darn good, I think, overall. And I think that you're going to be super happy with that in my mind. Granted, it's a time value for money thing. So you say, would I prefer to go to 3 or 4 movies, or I would prefer to have a Super Nintendo? It's kind of up to each in the eye, the eye of the beholder there. But in my mind, I think that's an easy way to kind of get into that kind of retro feel with good set of games to play.
Absolutely. So lots of good ideas for how to kind of approach the conversation with the retro gamer coming back in. Let's talk about our next category. So the gamers, whether new or old, that are drawn back by the hot new release. And I'd like to kind of start with the story. Way back when the Xbox first came out, it was affectionately known by many as the Halo TV converter, right? Because you had so many people that said, I've never played a Microsoft console before. I have no idea what this thing is. I have no idea what games or what franchises I should associate with Microsoft. But everybody in my dorm room is playing Halo. I need Halo. And they basically would approach the situation saying, I need this exact one game. I need to figure out how to get it. But there was always, I would say, this kind of push and pull between, I want this game, but am I really about to spend several $100s
to get it,
to get just this one game?
Yep.
Am I really going to like it that much? So I think with this conversation, a lot of the focus becomes honestly becoming more of a pitch man. You're really trying to kind of build the dream to say, yeah, Halo, here's what's here today, right? Halo's here today. Let me talk to you about what is coming out over the next 12 months.
What game can I put you in?
Exactly. Where can I put you? And I find these conversations, honestly, to be the most fun when I approach these, because you're kind of selling the dream. I'm not trying to sell a timeshare here, right? I'm not trying to sell something I don't believe in. But I am trying to kind of build the case, because I get this question all the time. I'm looking to come back in. I kind of like this game. But in many cases, let's say it's a multi-platform game. I want to play the new Call of Duty or something like that, where you've got options out there. And so they're really asking me to make a console recommendation. And I'm always the type where, again, I have my own personal biases, but I'm always going to talk through with somebody to say, here's the pros and cons. Here are the different, what I'll call signature franchises of each company that you should expect. If you like this game or you like this genre, here is what this company does well.
Right.
And I find these conversations very interesting, because it kind of exposes my bias. Inevitably, it comes out in the conversation, but I really do kind of try to really understand their needs. Again, I'm sounding like I'm selling a timeshare, but these are conversations that I would imagine most of our audience has been confronted with at some point in their lives.
Well, another question you want to ask, and you kind of gravitated towards consoles right there, but I also think that where you do your gaming is really important as well, and that may drive you towards PC. So maybe, I think your average person who doesn't game and doesn't have a PC isn't going to go drop, $800-900 or more on a gaming PC. Certainly, you can spend many thousands on a gaming PC. But if they have a PC at home for home office use or for work or things like that, and it's applicable or easy to go out and buy, $250 new graphics card and help get them to the point where they can play good games. And they just kind of like playing in that kind of office atmosphere, a sedentary kind of an atmosphere with, outside of a family room or whatever. That's certainly something to remember or to think about, because, I think where you game is super important. If you are looking at a family gamer or you're looking to have lots of friends over, you want to have it in a common area with maybe a big television where, you can have lots of people in front of it and can be watching, and you can hand off controllers or whatever. But if your point here instead is to say, okay, well, my wife is going to be in the other room, or her and her friends are going to be in the other room watching Netflix. I want to be in my room with headphones on, playing My Last of Us or whatever it is. I'm probably going to be, I might gravitate more towards a solution that's kind of set off the side. Now, that may not drive the console versus PC debate, but it's something to consider overall.
I agree, and I do think the console versus PC debate, it's not something that I confront a ton. I do think a game like Overwatch, that to me is kind of going to be that game of this generation, that I think there are a lot of people that are seeing coverage, they hear about it from a friend. I think that is a game that is drawing people back that maybe have been away for a while, or they don't have the latest hardware generation, or they don't have a PC that they feel is up to spec. And I do think that is going to be a game that introduces this conversation more and more. I do think all of the VR options that are out there, you touched on it a little bit earlier, but I do think this is a technology that a little too early to determine whether it's going to be really mainstream and how wide an audience it's going to reach. But I certainly think that there are going to be people that are, I would call it, technology savvy people that always want the latest and greatest thing. This is certainly an exciting technology that, whether it pans out or not, I think there are a lot of people that are willing to have disposable income, that are willing to give it a shot. But they also want to know, okay, if this VR thing, maybe if it's not for me, I would like to have a console that maybe I buy a game or two for at the end of this. And I think they do kind of, they're smart buyers, and they know that if I'm going to make a decision like this and I'm going to invest maybe up to $1,000 to kind of go from the ground up and get everything, then they want to know that they're in good hands. Yeah,
and in this particular category, just to kind of shift the point we're making here a little bit more perhaps, is I think, and this actually happened to me with a friend that I work with who came to me and said, I want to start getting back into games. I want to start getting my family and my kids back into games. How most effectively can I do this? And from this particular perspective, it's not someone who's coming to me saying, hey, I'm being drawn to one specific game in the latest generation. It's, hey, I heard some cool games. In fact, they had listened to the podcast, and this is kind of what started it all. You're welcome, Sony. But it gets to the point where maybe there's actually something where if they're drawn, like a Call of Duty, for example, they're drawn to the latest Call of Duty, on PS4 or on other platforms like that. Maybe it's worth looking at other alternatives where, hey, you can have a PS3 instead that's a little bit cheaper, that has maybe an iteration behind that. Call of Duty might be a bad example given the server's up or maybe up or down or whatever. But I think that there's some interesting components there that you might want to consider as well, because you can go out and you can get inside of get a PS3 relatively cheaply. The games, in many cases, are going to be dirt cheap. You're going to pay $10, $15 for a game. It will tell you, number one, whether you even like the game from minimal input. PS3, for example, I always recommend PS3 for people. Xbox 360s are very good as well if you can get one that's not likely to red ring. The later generation when they kind of made it smaller. But you get like a PS3 Slim, relatively cheap. There are many, 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 many games you can get into. You can get into The Last of Us. You don't have to get the HD remix in PS4, for example. You can play some of the older Uncharted. You can play any number of games like the game with Sackboy.
Little Big Planet.
Little Big Planet, exactly. Those kinds of games.
I'll wail on that game in a little bit, but
Great.
But you raise a great point. It kind of overlaps a bit with our third category, where we talked about people who have skipped a console generation. To your point, they want to get in.
Right.
They want to get into the hobby, but they don't really know where to jump back in. They just want to play the good stuff. And I think this is both the hardest, but I think in a lot of cases the most rewarding, and where I feel like I would call it my gaming resume, if you will, really comes to bear the most, where I really enjoy talking to people about, let me kind of walk you through, if I were just had however much my budget was and I wanted to play some great games, and you just said, hey, I'm kind of a blank slate, you tell me, what would you play? I love talking to people and kind of giving them an idea of, here are my favorite games. And to your point, depending on how important graphics are, how close to latest generation that they seem to want to go, and I do think that's different for everybody. But a lot of times, I will find myself saying, pick up a PS3, like you said.
Exactly.
Price is easy. You can both get the newer games on the cheap. But I think Sony has also done a very good job of building out the back catalog of some of the best PS2 games and PS1 games.
Most definitely.
Where you got $5, $10 depending on the console cycle. You can download it. You don't. A lot of these type of buyers, they don't necessarily want to have. They don't have space to have a bunch of physical copy games crowding their living room. They want to put a box down. They want to go. And I find that getting them into something like that, where you can get multiple generations, and say, you know what, you're going to pick up you're going to pick up exactly all the games you mentioned. You get your Ratchet and Clank. You're going to get your Jak and Daxter. You're going to get, if you like Grand Theft Auto or whatever it may be.
Yep.
But you also you want to pick up Persona 3 and 4? Great. You can download those.
Yeah.
You want to play Final Fantasy 7? That's available as well. And there's lots of things like that where you say, you can get the new stuff on the cheap, but you can also make sure that you've got those options that, even though they are kind of retro at this point, I would say a lot of, especially the PS2 era games or Xbox era games, I find those very, very playable by modern standards. So meaning that most gamers, certainly for us, we play a lot of retro games, so I don't think we get turned off when we see old-looking games.
Right.
But I certainly meet gamers, and I totally respect that when people come back to the hobby, and let's say their frame of reference is they've seen the new hotness, they see A Last of Us, or they see Uncharted, taking a step back a couple generations, that may be more than they really want to do. They just say, I want this to look good, and I always respect that. But I think that's where getting into something like a PS3, it keeps you pretty darn current.
Oh, yeah, great games, for sure.
If there's a particular game or genre that clicks, maybe you are willing to go back a generation and play maybe the prequel to that game, or the first entry in that series. And I really think that is sometimes an underrated way to get people back, by saying you can get all of the gaming fun, but you can do it at a fraction of the price.
Right.
And you know what? If you don't hit with the first game, if it's not something that clicks with you, guess what? For the cost of a new release, you may have purchased 3 to 4 games.
Oh, easily.
And one of those will click.
Yeah, no, those games are, by all intents and purposes, whether it's graphics, sound, gameplay, story, to your point, they're all absolutely exceptional. And I will mention one other thing, because this has come up in the past for me. I think that, to your point, I think that if it's a newer gamer and they don't want to get into retro things, they want to kind of stay relatively close, the PS3 and arguably the Xbox 360 and the newer form, as I mentioned, are good ways to kind of jump in. Obviously, I think the PS3 probably is a little bit better, despite the fact that the interactivity is a little bit different. But certainly, the PSN stuff is still free for PS3, unless you want to do some other stuff and want to get Plus. But so that's a cheap way to get into it. I would not recommend, however, trying to get, say, like backwards compatible PS3s. Those are almost impossible to find. Impossible to find correctly on eBay. Some of them don't work very well. The support for backwards compatibility was really awkward and odd. If you really want to play PS2 stuff, you can pick up a PS2 Slim, for example. I just picked one up for like $40-something on eBay, and granted, I had to look for a while to find one that was in decent shape that worked. It was $40. Sometimes they're $50 or $60 or whatever, but I still think that overall, for this particular brand of gamer, the best bet is to go PS3 for all the points you mentioned, Aaron. I mean, the overall bang for the buck is just outstanding. And then what you'll come out from that is not only will you have a great console with great sets of games you can continue to play long term, but you'll also have an understanding of what you enjoy and what you don't enjoy, and whether, at this point, you could walk away from gaming entirely and say, you know what, gaming's just not gone where I want it to go. Or you can be rekindled and say, oh, you know what, I need to go buy that PS4 or that PS4 Neo, for example, when it comes out. And you know what? You will own a PS4 before Aaron does, and he's a gamer.
This may be true. I'm not going to lie, but I have heard leaks that the Neo is coming soon.
September 7th, they're going to announce it.
This is what I've heard.
Well, most likely, I don't know if that means it's going to come out this year or not.
I've heard first week of October, so not to speculate too much.
I don't see them. Not to get too, but I don't know. I don't know if that's going to happen this year.
But one of the things I would caution for this type of gamer, and I catch myself having to do this quite a bit. You find yourself almost wanting to, once the question gets asked, what would you play? If you were me, you had a few $100 to spend, what would you buy? And you kind of are like a kid in a candy store, and you want to tell them every cool game that you like for that generation. And what I often have to back up and do is, instead of kind of imposing the games that I like on them, I try to ask a lot of questions, whether it's to figure out another game that they've played that they liked, or to ask them about maybe saw something they saw at a friend's house or saw a family member. Really just get a frame of reference of where do I think I have the greatest probability to connect them with a game that they like. Because as long as they have one good experience, even if I recommend 5 or 6 games and they don't like half of them, the reality is, with the trade-in market the way it is, it's not like it's that big of an investment. But you certainly don't want to pair them with a pile of games that they won't like. So
as long as they're not Child of Eden.
Okay. That's fair. I think that, to me, as long as I feel like I have done my civic duty of connecting them with at least a game that they're going to have fun with, then I feel like I've done my job, and that you're never going to be able to perfectly predict taste. But as long as you feel like you've done your due diligence, you've asked enough questions, and you really don't feel like you have basically pushed your gaming preferences onto somebody who may not connect with games the same way you do, then I feel like you, the audience member who will inevitably have this conversation, you will have done your job and made the business casual gamers community proud.
When people ask me that question, I just go the easy route and tell them to go buy a CDI and buy the Zelda games for CDI. And when they come back and see me next, they punch me in the face and tell me I owe them some egregious amount of money they paid for these horrible, horrible games. So.
I was about to say, I don't think that's a judgment-proof thing. I'm sure there is a class action lawsuit bubbling up.
Oh, I'm sure.
People who were inflicted mental anguish by Chris Smoke.
Oh, well, I try. What can we say? All right, so I think that wraps that topic up really well. We'd love to hear more of your feedback on this topic in particular. If there are other types of gamers situations you've had personally that you'd like to interact with, you'd like to discuss or whatever, please hit us up on Twitter. Send us emails, messages on YouTube. We want to hear about those kinds of things, because I know all of us face those kinds of things. And what we want to do here, again, not to reiterate what Aaron mentioned before, the very beginning of the topic, is we're trying to continue to build an overall community here, and I think that there are a lot of people who are intimidated in some cases by trying to get back in to the gaming industry. You know, it's changed certainly a lot in how it looks and feels externally, but the core process of how games work has really not changed. And so with that, I think we can move on to the next topic here. So this week we actually have another Founded on Twitch, and you know, we do this periodically with some games here, or with some gamers we find on Twitch. We have a really interesting one this week, and I this is one that I have. We should have mentioned him a lot earlier in the thing, because the podcast series, because I have been watching him for a long period of time, and this gentleman is Dan. His channel is DansGaming. So if you go to Twitch TV/DansGaming, you should definitely check him out. He is what I'd call a variety streamer. He streams a lot of games that come out periodically, new games and whatnot. He spends a lot of time in things. But one of the interesting parts about Dan is actually he is, in the best way and the most strict way possible, he is an old school streamer. Dan has, as of a couple weeks ago, I think, Dan has been streaming on Twitch TV, and before that, Justin TV, for over 7 years.
Wow, I don't see many that have those credentials.
It's honestly, I know, I apologize if I'm leaving anyone out. I know that he has been streaming for a while. Man vs. Game has been streaming for a while, who we'll probably talk about in a later episode. But I've been watching him for about 6 of those years. Right in the Justin TV move over to Twitch, I started getting into watching him in Man vs. Game. And so Dan is one of those interesting, really down-to-earth streamers. He's one of those guys, you know, the way I describe him, honestly, he's like that friend that you have who streams on Twitch. He is so easy to watch. He's very down to earth. He's very kind of laid back. He's not one of those kinds of guys, you know. And this is not saying either way is bad or good, but there are many streamers out there who come in as entertainers, and they whoa, you know, right. Crazy screams. Zany. They have zany kinds of things. They have personas that they put on, and that's all well and good. Perfect to have those kinds of personas, but there are certain times, and for me in particular, where I can't handle the screaming, I can't handle the persona. I just want to feel like I'm sitting there on the couch next to a friend playing a game, and you know, same jokes are being cracked. You know, we're laughing our heads off. It's great. Dan's that kind of streamer. He is certainly a person who plays a lot of games. He has a lot of background. He's a real person, you know, with real emotions back and forth. He has lots of funny jokes. Some are off color, some are not. He has a great streaming community, and I can't say enough great things about Dan. You know, he plays such an interesting variety of games. You know, I think he stopped doing it recently, but you should go back and look at his videos on demand. Look at his things on YouTube. He used to do a kind of a lack of a better term, a Fright Fest kind of a thing, where in October he'd stream, you know, stream and restream old VODs of him playing Resident Evil and other kinds of scary kinds of games. So he has these kinds of things where he picks up certain does certain marathons or certain themes over time. And I think he's one of those kinds of guys that, you know, it's just a very unique streamer on Twitch, and he has done so exceptionally well with himself. You know, he has been a part of this new group that formed about a year ago now, I guess, called Nerd Fusion, that really is it's a group of streamers who've tried to push forward in this streaming thing, you know, and kind of build a more of a community, much like we're kind of trying to build here in many respects. So I don't know if you've been able to watch Dan in the past.
I've watched a little bit, and I think that I really appreciate the point you made, where a lot of times when I'm watching any kind of streaming or whatever the forum is, I am more the type that, much like what you described, I just want to kind of chill out and have some fun watching games.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want to be screamed at, and I'm not saying, exactly as you mentioned, I'm not saying there's not room for that. I'm not saying it's not entertaining. But in terms of when I typically find myself wanting to watch streaming, it's at the end of a day of work. It's right before I go to bed. I hear about a game. I want to see it. I don't actually have time to play it myself. I just want to sit down and watch 15 minutes of the game.
Yeah.
And I certainly appreciate the kind of persona where I just want to chill out and have a good time and you know, kind of enjoy the ride, versus feel like I need to be entertained. I really I'm coming for the game, and I just want to hear a little bit of color commentary around it. And I think certainly from what I've watched, I think that was definitely the vibe I was getting from watching Dan. And so this is one that I will check out more of, just as like you said, I appreciate the range of games. Certainly a lot of times I don't know what I want to watch necessarily. A lot of times it's like, I just want to sit down, I want to watch a game, and let's see what he's doing.
Exactly. So I highly recommend you go out, you take a look at Dan's channel. Again, that's Twitch TV/DansGaming. We'll have links in the show notes and all of that as well. We'll link to him on our Twitter when we post the video. So I highly recommend you go talk to him, you go interact with him, support him in any way possible. Really, really good streamer on Twitch, and he's been doing it for a long, long time. So.
Excellent. So with that, well, if you didn't hear episode 16 where we talked about our Sega retrospective, at the end of that, we tried to, I won't necessarily say sample the best of the best, but sample, I would say, some iconic Sega franchises. So with that, Chris, I assigned to you the probably more classic and well-known Earthworm Jim. So it has been forever since I've played this game, Jim. Chris. How does old Jim hold up?
So, I am a big Earthworm Jim fan. I actually am. And this is a bit of a background here. So, in my personal opinion, Earthworm Jim was released on Super Nintendo, Genesis, other things. I mentioned previously in the show here that I think the Genesis version is actually the better version of Earthworm Jim, honestly. It was developed by a group named Shiny Entertainment. This gentleman by the name of David Perry was heavily involved. And what I like about this game, the reason I bring David Perry up is there were a lot of games at the time where David Perry was playing in this space, particularly I think Aladdin for the Genesis was another one. And one of the keys, and I don't know if he's the key factor here, if there are other key factors in it, but one of the things that I love about this game is just the animation and the vivid nature of the environments they create. So Earthworm Jim is a platformer at its core. Really, really nice interactivity. Of course, you've got this Earthworm who is in this crazy super spacesuit thing who's going around trying to do things like launch cows.
Right.
Crazy.
I still remember the cows.
Crazy sense of humor in the game, which I think it is one of its more endearing qualities. This is kind of back in the time when, you had Sonic and you had Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and things like that. And I think this was created as a quote-unquote Me Too for that phrase, but for that phase of gaming. But realistically, Earthworm Jim still holds up in my mind. It's very fun. One of the things I like the most about it is not only just the graphics and the great quality of the animation, but the overall sound effects. Even for on the Genesis kind of inferior sound chip, there are a lot of voices and there are a lot of sound effects that really, really are interesting. At the core gameplay of the game, there's enough differentiation among the platforming. There's a lot of swinging, a lot of kind of nuanced things. Albeit there are some points there where I did get frustrated, and almost any game I think there are going to be those points.
Absolutely.
But they throw in a lot of things, like there's a rocket sequence, which is kind of a kind of a racing kind of a thing across this circular kind of a cylinder, for lack of a better term. That kind of helps break up some of the, not monotony necessarily, but the level, side scroller. Right. And there's even more variety that, like you might expect. There's an underwater level. There's a lava, kind of a magma level. There are some, other, the first level is actually particularly pretty funny, and it's kind of like a junkyard in a way. And combining that with the cow launch and those kinds of, the kooky sense of humor and how they approach the character, Earthworm Jim really does have a kind of a unique perspective, a unique kind of feel to him that you didn't get with a Sonic or a TMNT or a Mario or anything like that. I actually should have gone back. I know they went out and re-released Earthworm Jim on later consoles recently. I don't know if recently is like a year or in the last couple months, but these are one of those kinds of games I think that I really like. I would recommend other people go out and try and pick up in whatever form is possible. I know there's a sequel. I played half of that. I didn't get a chance to play it this time, but I played that in the past, and I think I did really enjoy it if I recall correctly. In the end, all in all, really, really fun game for the time. Highly recommend it if you have a Genesis or you want to kind of get into those kinds of old school platformers where you go out and collect things and have some neat interactions, and you want to laugh too in the end.
Excellent. So, I'm glad to hear that game holds up. I certainly think that is one of the franchises that is held up by people as one of the Sega classics. So I am glad that it is still fun to this day.
It really has. It really has. Now, Aaron, for you, we decided to assign you Kid Chameleon for the Genesis, and I'm interested to know how that one went.
So it's interesting. So I own this game. This was actually, for those of you who didn't hear our last episode, this was actually one of the games that when I got my my Sega Genesis for Christmas, this was sitting alongside the pack-in Sonic 1 and Sonic 2. And, at the time, I actually played the game quite a bit. I enjoyed it. Certainly, put a lot of hours. Now, part of that's obviously when you have a console with 3 games, you're going to play what you got. But going back to this game, it was interesting. I think the thing that stood out immediately, the intro to this game is hysterical. If you want to talk about story in games, the jumping off point for this felt very Bad Dudes-ish, where you've got this new arcade that the kids are going to, and somehow, I don't even know, like, this feels like bad translation almost, but it's like the boss is exiting the game machine and beating kids. And it's like,
sounds like the basis for a great game.
This is like metaphysical, right? This is like the boss is beating you at a game that he's now no longer
physically beating you.
Yeah, it was like, is this physical violence? Do we need to call somebody?
Right.
But then you have this middle school dropout that is standing in the alley with a leather jacket that it looks like he beat up an elementary school kid and stole, wearing his shades, flipping a coin in his hand, and he was too cool to be beat. And you're sitting there looking at this like, back then, when you were playing that when you're like 9, this kid is probably he's living the dream, right? He's skipping school. He is the kid that can beat the game, that's beating on everybody else apparently. But looking back at it now, I just had to kind of sit there and chuckle. This is what passed for video games story, huh?
Yeah.
And so with that said, again, these are all comical asides, but because many video game stories are about that deep when you go back that far. But one of the things that did stand out to me is that at its core, Kid Chameleon is a platformer, right? Very much in the same vein of a Mario. And while I think Sonic was certainly more billed as the Mario competitor, I certainly think Kid Chameleon was something that when I look at Super Mario Brothers 3, I have got to believe that they developed this game with that game in mind. So for those of you who haven't played it, you get lots of different masks throughout the game that turn you into different characters. Like you can become the samurai, or you can become I'm forgetting the exact
rhino,
names.
I think.
Yeah, you can become it looks like an alien more. That's the one I was struggling to describe. You get the Juggernaut, which is a tank that can kind of go over blocks and shoot these skull projectiles. And one of the things that they must have designed in mind, they must have been looking at the Super Mario Brothers 3 suits and saying, hey, people like this. They want to be a tanuki. They want to be a raccoon. How do we give them that? Like, we've got better graphics. We've got better system capabilities.
Make it edgier.
Exactly. And one of the things that jumped out so clearly to me, which I feel like it goes underappreciated in every platformer, but you do know it when you see it, is that Kid Chameleon's jumping just doesn't feel right.
Oh, it's absolutely awful.
And it feels, and this is when I made the joke earlier about Little Big Planet. I love the aesthetic. I love the idea. I love the design. I love the fact that you can build your own levels in Little Big Planet. But at its core, it is a platformer, and it has bad floaty jumping where you do not feel in control of your character. And to me, that is just a cardinal sin that you cannot forgive.
It's not
in a
Mega Man
platformer.
crisp.
Yeah, it better. If you're going to compete with Mario, you better feel like Mario. Doesn't have to be the exact same. There are plenty of platformers that you take Rayman, as I've always mentioned. Rayman's jumping does not feel like Mario, but you feel in control. Once you master it, you absolutely know with I would say pixel precision, if I do this, this is what's going to happen. And Kid Chameleon just performing simple tasks like hitting the block above you to get the diamond out is hard.
It's hard.
It just is. And I'm not, again, I'm not trying to oversell this, but I really do feel like when you're playing these games, it should be intuitive. I shouldn't have to think when I'm just trying to hit a block. Now, one of the things that I think could have been done much better with the game, and honestly, I feel like most people could play this game and maybe not even know that this exists. So many people would have come to this game after Mario, and they are used to the mechanic that, well, I see these pickup items, these coins, and when I get 100 of these, I get an extra life, right? And intuitively, I can imagine a lot of people came to Kid Chameleon and said, well, okay, your coins are diamonds. So I'm going to collect these. I'm going to get an extra life. But what you don't realize immediately is that the diamonds are actually, I would call it currency that you use special powers that you have for these masks. Even the default Kid Chameleon has special powers. The problem is they just did a horrible job of getting the math right in terms of how much does it cost to use these abilities, how often you're getting diamonds dropped. it really feels like a luxury purchase when you actually get to use these abilities.
It's like using elixir.
Exactly.
It's
the elixir of Kid Chameleon. And to me, when you actually use the abilities, it is kind of a differentiating factor. You're like, oh, this is pretty cool. Like this is something that if they would have made this the focus and said all the suits, we're going to give you tons of diamonds. Like maybe we use some kind of an ammo concept, if you will, but we're going to let you go wild with this stuff. I actually feel like this game would hold up a lot better to this day. And I honestly feel like, even though I don't know, because the franchise has been dead for so long, I don't know that it's relevant enough to bring back. But I do think if you kind of came back with the idea that you're going to transform into different characters, there may be enough nostalgia to kind of make a game like this if you got the platforming right and you got the power-ups. I do feel like this is a game where I would love for an indie developer to come along, figure out how to get this license and actually do some kind of a retro remake with this game, because I feel like you could actually improve on it quite a bit. The other thing that did jump out to me is that the level progression was really just choppy. There felt like there was no rhyme or reason to the level structure. When you look at stuff like Mario Brothers, where you had the snow world or the lava world or things like that, right, where it was very easy to visually identify, these are the types of things I'm going to be doing in these levels before I ever set foot in the actual stage. There's really no visual cues from Kid Chameleon of where are you going. You get a splash screen at the beginning of each stage. Okay, Enchanted Woods 1. Great. What does that mean?
Is there a 2 or 3?
There often is.
Oh, okay.
But then you skip around and you go to the cave level, and then you go to back to Enchanted Forest, and it feels just super choppy. And that part of the game I feel like was something that honestly would have been really easy to get right for them. But it just felt like
they kind of phoned it in.
Yeah, they did. Yeah. It felt like it was something where the developer said, hey, I need 60 levels, and I'm going to have 5 people work on this. Come back to me with your best levels by Monday. And everybody kind of went and did their own thing. And then they sat down and they pieced it all together, like putting the class project together at the end. And it very much just feels kind of hashed together. So all that to say, as I had both of my sons playing this and watching it with me, and as I almost rage quit after one of the jumping things, I kept falling in this pit. And I basically, they were playing with their Despicable Me fart gun, one of the favorite toys in our house. And I said, honestly, the noise you just made is probably the best review I could give to this game. It's just a long fart noise. Like, I really think that is how you could sum this game up. Yeah, pretty much.
It's over.
So I will sum up Kid Chameleon with a fart noise, but having the Sega nostalgia, I'm actually going to bring the double feature this week. We were talking about Alex Kidd, the game that kind of launched the Sega Master System. And I honestly, I had probably played this game, but I barely even remembered it when we talked about it on the last episode. And so I went back and I had it, and I was like, all right, let's fire up Alex Kidd. Now, this game, this is one where I looked at it and was like, how did Sega survive? Like, I can't even believe Sega rebounded from this game.
That's got to be bad.
This has got to be one of the worst games ever made. It literally
Next to Child of Eden.
It is even Child of Eden on its worst day. Like, I think that Child of Eden is staring at this game saying, what just happened?
I'm going to have to play this now.
You really do.
Okay.
I will say that my sons, the animations are so bad that basically I decided that I was going to go through the stages only by crawling on the ground. So I crawled through the stages, and then when you would inevitably get hit because the collision detection is so poor and you never know whether you're going to jump on an enemy and die or whether you're going to stomp him and actually beat the enemy, the animation of him dying and going into heaven, I guess, or turning into an angel, the sound effects that go with that, they were so funny that my kids were just cracking up, rolling on the floor like, you need to die again. The game is bad, right? It is just straight up garbage bad, and it really does make me wonder how Sega came back. But I will say, for the probably, I think I agreed to play this game for 10 minutes before I was like, okay, boys, like, I'm not playing this bad game anymore. We've had our laughs. It's time to move on. It was a 10 minutes that was full of laughter. So I honestly, if I were to review this, in some ways, I think I did appreciate it more than Kid Chameleon because I found myself laughing rather than rage quitting.
Now I want to totally play this game. I know I'm going to kick myself for saying
this. You shouldn't
do
that, Chris. You really shouldn't.
I'll watch a YouTube video maybe and see.
You'll get the effect. Trust me.
Well, that's great. Okay, so that was last episode's assignments. This episode, or next episode's assignments. So we wanted to kind of, in keeping with our theme of this discussion topic of this episode, we want to see if we can pick some games that, out of the blue, without knowing anything a priori, what we would recommend for newer returning gamers. And so, Aaron, for you, I decided to pick one that, I think it's such a good game. It's an exceptional game for the Wii. And I actually think Nintendo would be very dumb not to continue this franchise, honestly. It's Super Mario Galaxy 2.
Yes.
Which I think is arguably one of the best Mario games of all time. Really, really fun thing. I know, surprised, we're supposed to see what he thinks about it. But I would be very surprised if you don't really enjoy this game.
So this came out, Chris and I were talking about franchises. I personally, as much as I love Super Mario World, Super Mario 3, I personally think that Super Mario Galaxy is my personal favorite. Now, shamefully, I have played a part of Super Mario Galaxy 2, but I can't remember what new release came out at the time, but I got distracted and just have never kind of jumped back in. I am really looking forward to playing this game, and kind of in keeping with our topic, Chris, to your point, I think this is a game where if somebody had a Wii, that the Super Mario Galaxy franchise is the one that I would tell them to run and pick up. In fact, I lent my copy of Super Mario Galaxy to a friend who had some older boys. I was like, just give them this. They will know what to do with this. Give them that. Don't look back. And I think it was a phenomenal game, and I'm looking forward to playing this.
You might even be able to buy I don't know what used Wiis go for, but I assume you can probably buy all that if you're interested in getting and picking it up relatively cheap.
I would totally agree.
Maybe I'm wrong.
So for my assignment for you, Chris, this, as we were talking earlier, a lot of times the PlayStation 3 is a frequent recommendation. And honestly, this is the game that I both have recommended and would recommend above all other PlayStation 3 games. If you listen to our very first episode of the Business Casual Gamers podcast, I went through my personal top 10 list. And clocking in at number 2 was a cult classic, Katamari Damacy. Now, the one I would recommend and that I will be assigning you this week, Chris, is Katamari Forever. Now, Katamari Forever, for those of you who have either not played it or don't know how this particular one is different, Katamari Forever was basically a best hits edition of this game, where it compiled the very best levels from Katamari Damacy, We Love Katamari, and then also the PSP version of the game, which didn't sell as well but had some cool level designs. And basically repackages it, has hilarious dialogue with the king and the prince, all the good stuff that you know and love, and all of the best levels, in my opinion, in the game.
Very nice.
So I'm really looking forward. I know you have played the franchise.
I have.
But I'm looking forward to hearing your opinion. Is this one where if you're going to lead off with a game, do you think it's still good enough to basically hand this to a new gamer or somebody unfamiliar with the franchise and say, take this, you'll have a good time?
Yeah, I can't wait to play this game. It's been so long since I played a Katamari game. I know I'm going to love it. But yeah, it'll be very interesting to look at it through this lens, honestly. See if it's something that is certainly applicable. The way I looked at it in the past is kind of how you would look at it. It's a little bit kooky. We all know those kinds of interactions you mentioned with the king and all that are really interesting. But I can't wait to really sink my teeth into this one.
Excellent. So with that, we're going to bring episode 17 of the Business Casual Gamers podcast to a close. As we mentioned earlier, check us out, businesscasualgamers.com. We'd love to interact with you throughout the week and get your stories of maybe some conversations you're having, maybe inspired by this episode with some people in your life that are looking to get back into the hobby. So with that, we'll bring this episode to a close, and we will see you all in 2 weeks.
Thanks, all.